Allison's here. Sam is here. Fan favorites.
Third time? Third time?
No, this is 2 for you.
In this incarnation.
Yeah. You've been on the channel a lot. Yeah. And what about you?
This is 3 for me.
Oh, dude.
I don't know if this keep inviting me back, but
And Sam brought gifts.
Do you see that I now have, I don't know if you noticed, but I now have sounds. I don't think I had sounds last time you were here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, that's interesting.
That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So
Actually,
Michael loves it.
this is about to be like 40% more expensive
Why?
because it's a product that comes in a can, in a bottle, and everything's getting more expensive.
Right, and then, rice and grains. And
Ethanol. I just learned that ethanol is like alcohol or something.
Yeah.
I'm a chemist.
Right.
You just learned this?
Yeah, I just learned it.
Okay. So what we have here is
Soju. Soju, and the company is Jinro.
Okay.
And Jinro is like
King of soju.
like either the number 1 or number 2. Like
Is
biggest selling
Jinro the
liquor.
company that was in Lost in Translation?
No, that was
Suntory.
Suntory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Close.
Close. All right, we're gonna hit that. I'm so glad we have you guys here today. Let's first talk about
Especially Allison.
especially Allison. No, I feel like you guys are the right people for the right moment in time, because what's going on right now has stock market ramifications, obviously, but a lot of this stuff is above my pay grade as somebody who's not an economist. Obviously, I have opinions, which sometimes is all that counts. But Allison, you've got expertise, and Sam, I know you're reading a lot of what the sell side has to say about the implications of everything. So the first thing I wanted to get into was just this idea that really almost nothing else matters other than Russia right now, with good reason. It feels as though companies are announcing things. There's a reaction in the stock market for a few hours, and then that fades, and we get back into like, okay, Russia, prime time, this is everything. What's the most surprising thing, Allison, I'll start with you. What's the most surprising thing about the conflict? Maybe not that it happened, but what aspect of it or do you think you're most surprised by?
Well, this is less economic, but just how it sort of brought everyone together, because I didn't think anything would. Or I thought we'd gotten pretty indifferent to global conflicts that weren't directly happening to us. So I think everyone coming together and being so united on this definitely surprised me.
So Putin's gift
like,
to the world is togetherness.
Yeah, I mean, you would have thought that the coronavirus pandemic would have brought everybody together, but it ended up being divisive.
Drove a wedge between us.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I agree.
Who's been brought together though? Are you saying countries or people?
Almost everyone.
Everyone. I think like
Republicans and Democrats,
except for Tucker Carlson.
We're about to pass a bipartisan bailout or sort of aid package, and I feel like we're hearing less like let's interrogate our past and like look at everything bad we've done, because I think our mission in the world seems a little bit more apparent, and also as I said, our relationships with NATO. Like I think I was talking to someone, actually it was Ian Bremmer like a month ago, where I asked him what the
not to brag, we talked to him too recently.
I saw.
Yeah,
that was a great show. And I asked him, what do you think the odds are that NATO is still going to be a thing in 10 years? And I can't remember what he said, but the probability was greater than even, but still non-trivial, maybe not. And now I have no doubt NATO is going to be around for 10 years.
Is the idea of NATO partly at fault for this? Not that we want to blame the victim, but maybe it would have been better for the people running Ukraine, not Zelensky, but just people for decades, not to have been fixated on this idea of joining NATO. Like maybe things would have been calmer, or this would have happened either way.
I mean, I'm not a political scientist. This isn't my expertise, but I did go to Russia shortly after Crimea, and I got the sense that Putin really wants to, get the Soviet Union back together. And I know from living in Eastern Europe in the 90s that a lot of Eastern European countries aspire to be more like Europe. Yeah. So whether or not there's an institution they could join, just they would have had an affinity to not be part of this old Soviet Union, be more part of Europe, and he wouldn't have stood for that, whether or not there's an institution or not. Right.
So Sam, most of the strategists that I read, and I read probably not as many as you, but a lot of them, it's a lot of this is what happened during the last 10 conflicts.
Right.
What else do they really have to go by?
I think that's a good starting point, and everyone just sort of seems to say that, you look at these 50 different conflicts, and then it's either 10 days or 100 days, the economy bounces back, market bounces back.
Right.
But they're not really thinking about the fundamentals, that's responsible for that. Because of course, with every conflict, the economic backdrop where it starts from is always different, right? So it's
yes.
it's one thing if the market's been crashing for, a year, and then some conflict happens, and then, a couple days later the market rallies. Well, maybe there was some other things happening before, the particular
Right. The conflict
happens.
is never the only variable that's affecting stocks and bonds at that time.
Right. But the thing that's kind of crazy that everyone always sort of like dances around, like, the ultra worst case scenarios that how do you prepare for stuff like that? It's I don't know if there's really an
Bitcoin.
answer. Yeah. Well, there are those sort of like the super worst case scenarios where none of this matters anymore, right? Like finance.
Well, that's the whole thing. If you're like writing sell side research for Merrill Lynch and they're like, what would the Dow Jones do in the worst case scenario? It's
cares?
like, you ain't going to care about the Dow Jones in
Right.
the worst case scenario.
But, I think something that, that's actually sort of like being forgotten already is what the world went through with the COVID pandemic. And that's still happening.
Yeah.
Right. You look at all these geopolitical events and it's like this happened, that happened, this many people died, these people were upset about whatever. It's like 900,000 Americans have died in the last 2 years. And that's
Right.
like
More than any war.
Yeah, it's like 50 times Pearl Harbor. It's 50 times, 9/11, and it's still happening.
Right.
Like there are going to be more people dying of COVID this week in the U.S. than 9/11 and Pearl Harbor combined.
Right. This week.
Yeah.
Does that desensitize us to the images that we're seeing on TV of like, I think they blew up a maternity ward last night. Are we just like, yeah, death is now in our face every minute? We can
I don't
deal
think
with this?
so. I think that's one of the reasons that Ukraine's having such a big impact on people is because, anyway, we might be less sensitive to people dying disease. I mean, violence still has a special resonance.
It's different. It's different.
And it's metropolitan cities. Like this could be Queens. We were driving down the LAE the other day, and I said to Josh, like, imagine just an airplane, like a fighter pilot, flying over the LAE.
Well, I mean, listen, this happened, like 20 years ago. 9/11, like this. We were attacked on U.S. soil,
Yeah.
and it was 3 miles from here.
You know what's different also about this conflict versus Crimea? And, I know there was an incursion into Warsaw in the early 80s and there was shit with Budapest. Like, I know Russia has been doing this pretty much since the beginning of the Cold War and never stopped. But this time, every man, woman, and child has a video camera that they are highly accustomed to pulling out. Like so fast that when their child smiles, they have video rolling. So now you really have the first urban like area conflict, a city where like millions of people are capable of filming it constantly and uploading it to social media. We've never really had an experience like that.
Right.
And I think to Allison's point, that is galvanizing more sentiment toward, Ukraine from everybody and uniting people maybe because we're all watching the same shit and it's horrible.
Yeah, and it seems like things are happening a lot faster too, right? It's like, a day after or 2 days after the invasion, the sanctions come down. The sanctions are sort of working 2 days later. There's more sanctions, and
I remember SWIFT was like such a big deal at the time, and I feel like that's sort of in the rearview mirror.
yeah,
that was
it
last
all
week.
happened within a week. Yeah.
What do you think about that? That seemed to shock everybody that Germany was in and then that the United States was in on removing Russian banks from the SWIFT system. That seemed to have been like a line that nobody thought they would cross that quickly.
Well, this is a really new territory because this is like economic warfare.
Right.
Usually this is it. People keep saying sanctions are about deterrence, but this is like full-on economic warfare,
Yeah.
which
We're
I-
turning off.
punishment
We're turning
now.
off their economy.
Yeah. Have we ever done anything like that before? I mean, I know we
everyone's got
to some
exposure,
degree
too.
Germany during World War I and World War II, but I mean, we were much less
did that-
globally integrated then.
We did this to our allies once, 100 years ago. The onset of World War I in Europe, we knew that like 20% of the stock market was owned by Britain. And it was backed by gold. And they were going to want that gold back if they were going to get into the war and start sending troops to. So we shut down the New York Stock Exchange, which effectively kept all that gold trapped. If you couldn't sell stocks, then you couldn't access remuneration for those stocks.
That word's tricky.
So they shut down the New York Stock Exchange, I think, for 6 months. And
6 months?
Something like that, yeah. And it's never happened before that, or it's never happened since. But they couldn't afford to have all the gold sucked out of New York and sent on steamer ships across the Atlantic to fight a war. That's kind of up that they did that.
6 months?
Yeah.
Like, what about shareholders who are American? I mean,
How long was World War I stock market shut down? Do you know offhand?
And I think it was 9 months or something like that.
9
God.
months.
1914 or
Never heard
15.
this?
No,
true.
that's crazy. I believe you.
I think June to December. So not 9 months. I think it was less. But what do you guys make of? Actually, before we get to this, I learned yesterday. I was talking to Sal Gilberti. He runs two Korean funds, which are I think like the only publicly traded ETFs that have like corn and wheat and all that stuff. Corn and wheat, or corn or wheat. One of those two. Ukraine and Russia are responsible for 30% of the global exports of those agricultural commodities, which is super scary. And we got this 7.9% inflation print this morning prior to the commodity spike. So February's numbers are going to be worse than what we just saw, which is already the worst number in 40 years. Like, this is crazy shit.
Yeah, I mean, this is particularly bad for folks in developing nations and low income ranges and stuff like that, because they're much more close. I don't know if it's a cultural thing or whatever, but they're much more close to the actual raw product, right? Like, people actually go out and they buy grains and they buy meat and they cook stuff in their kitchen. It's not processed so that Kraft and whoever is absorbing some of those costs, and you don't see it as quickly. Of course, in developing markets and for low-income folks, this is a higher percentage of their expenses.
Right. Food at home index rose 8.6% over the last 12 months, the largest such increase since 1981.
That's amazing, because food
That's
at home
food
at home has been going down all these years. Like, people aren't used to this at all.
Again, food away from home, same story, 6.8%, largest 12-month increase since 1981. And again, prior to the spike that we just saw. One of the things that's super scary about this is with the economic and financial warfare, we've never really seen like the complete like breakdown of trust, where the fact that we could just like turn countries off, and that is frightening.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. Like, let's say it's the right thing to do. So Russia stockpiled $630 billion worth of reserves, seemingly in advance of knowing they were about to do this, and basically, we were able to coordinate with global central banks to make it so that money was not usable. Mm-hmm. That might have been the right thing to do this time, but what does that do over the long term for sovereigns, countries thinking that the U.S. dollar is a reserve currency? Maybe it's not anymore.
Yeah, $630 billion, but it's based on trust. These are like digital, basically buttons on somebody's balance sheet. It's no, you have $630 billion.
Right,
good luck.
Right, so if Russia can't actually use that money, again, maybe that was the right decision now, but what does that mean 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
You would think this is a watershed moment for cryptocurrencies. Like, that something changed. This changes things.
Is it though? I mean,
so.
are they? I mean, I think we're also seeing that they're not really the answer.
Well, not right now.
Mm-hmm.
No,
but I think
Russia can't operate by Bitcoin. It's not big enough.
I think we will look back on this moment as one of the things that like sharply accelerated the transition or the adoption, the widespread adoption of crypto, whether it's CBDCs or Bitcoin or something else that hasn't been invented yet. Like, the idea that something could just be confiscated, I think, is going to change things.
But you also need reliable internet for that
true.
to work, and it doesn't seem like they have that either.
And that's also a whole other kind of scary, right? Like, this weapon, yeah, okay, so financial weapon or whatever, maybe that doesn't exist anymore because, assuming crypto, picks up. Then what are the options there? The bad guys keep financing whatever they can because crypto exists.
I don't think that they can evade sanctions to the extent that we're doing them, and get around like not being able to use SWIFT. I don't think the world's systems are set up to like sell wheat and fuel for Bitcoin. Like, it's just that idea probably we're not even close to. It doesn't seem like that's really going to help them. I wanted to ask you guys about the long-term consequences of corporations pulling out from Russia. Did any of that surprise you, how quickly they all acted?
Maybe it's like 8 or 9 years ago, I did some boondoggle tour through Coca-Cola, and it was right after we lifted trade sanctions on Myanmar, and we were talking to some global VP, and he was telling us how they sell Coke everywhere. Anywhere where they're allowed to sell, they sell, because they always had, this is self-serving, this idea that there was almost diplomacy. You bring Coke abroad, and there's like, we will sell Coke anywhere we're allowed to. And they have now pulled out of Russia. Like I can't think of Coca-Cola ever voluntarily pulling out of any market, with the exception of India, because when they went socialist, they wanted the secret formula, so they pulled out for them. But that was the only time they've ever voluntarily pulled out of a market.
Were you telling me that the U.S. has never attacked a country with McDonald's?
I think there's never been a cross-border war with a country that had a McDonald's in it, but I could be making that up.
They don't have McDonald's
I
now.
think there might have been a New York Times columnist that said something.
It was a
That
tweet. It
sounds
was
like
a
a
tweet.
Thomas Friedman.
No,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
a tweet. It's
Yeah,
true.
that
It's true.
sounds about right.
But McDonald's
Wait, did
pulled,
you say it was a tweet, so it's true?
yeah, McDonald's pulled out, right? And that's like 10% of their revenue. That's like not. That's material.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing here too, right? So it's like, we're talking about Russia and India, but like, China and Brazil. Now we're talking about this whole BRIC story that, so many companies said this is where we're growing into. It's like we've matured, like you're a gigantic company, you've matured, and you fully penetrated the US audience. Russia has, 100 million people there. And if you didn't have a lot of exposure, that was going to be one of your big growth opportunities. And that's no
Wait,
longer on
is
the
it
table.
10%? Can that possibly be true?
Yes. How many people are in Russia?
For McDonald's?
100 million?
Russia's the 11th biggest economy, and it's 10% of
They
McDonald's
love
revenue.
McNuggets.
They must love that shit. I had no
who
idea.
doesn't?
What?
Who doesn't?
Any thoughts? Any thoughts on the market's reaction today? I know it's like one day, so whatever. But it seems like on the CPI number, there wasn't like a big reaction in the stock market.
People have been freaking out about CPI for over a year now. We all look at that Bank of America fund manager survey that comes out every month. I think it's either 11 months ago or exactly a year ago that coronavirus went from number 1 to 2. And the top risk that fund managers were screaming about was inflation and higher than expected inflation.
This is one of those really rare times where I was definitely 12 months ago saying it's very rare that the risk that is so apparent actually transpires and becomes the risk. Right. And this is one of those really weird times where it did. A lot of people have been worried about inflation over the last 12 months. I was not one of them, wrong, obviously. And it actually came true. Yeah. Obviously, we didn't see the Russian thing, but we had inflation before this. This makes it worse.
We shouldn't understate the degree to which the Russia thing is sending this into overdrive.
100%.
We would not have like food commodities limit up day after day, and certainly we wouldn't have the natural gas spike if it weren't for the conflict.
I think from a sentiment standpoint and from a market standpoint, everyone was just a little bit better prepared for that surprise.
There's no bulls.
Yeah.
There's no bulls.
Yeah.
Hold on, before we get off this, Allison, do you have any takes on the London Metals Exchange, like canceling those orders? Sam, you? Anyone?
I wanted to ask, Goldman Sachs today shuttered their Russia business. They're the first major Wall Street bank to leave since the Ukraine war started. They won't be the last. Goldman Sachs is estimated to have $940 million in total exposure, or less than 10 basis points of its total assets, according to Bank of America. So it's a rounding error, but maybe the importance is more symbolic. What do you think? What do you think follows from there? Is everybody just do the same thing?
Don't you think they were getting pressure from clients? Probably.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's like the
Employees.
Coca-Cola thing. It's like you just can't do business there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think Coca-Cola, if they weren't getting the sort of pressure from all the other European countries, would have ever considered it. It's now just, I mean, it's sort of like the ESG movement. It's like now you're expecting.
Yeah, I'm starting to think Russia isn't ESG.
It is. What you wonder is is this self-defeating?
I'm starting to worry about that.
Well, also, do you wonder, is this like causing more harm than good? Because now we're just punishing average Russians, and it's not like they want to live under Putin either.
They want
that's-
McDonald's.
That's
Yeah.
incredibly sad.
It's awful.
part
He
of this.
fucking did it. Like Putin did this to his
Yeah,
to
but
his
it's not like
people.
they elected him, or at least not legitimate.
Well,
Yeah,
wait.
and you see like, the tens of thousands of people in the streets like protesting and all this stuff, and they're all get exposed to all this.
Do you remember when like JP Morgan had to answer for like they had employees bribing government officials in Asia, like, we'll get your kid a job at JP Morgan?
Right. Yep.
And people were like, like, isn't that how you do business in
Right.
these countries? There's no real other way.
And we do business that way here too.
I'm sure we do. It's just maybe less overt or less offensive,
Yeah.
but it's not different.
It's probably, I think everyone just sort of made a collective decision at the same time, also understanding that this was going to come with a cost to yourself, right? Like even when, Biden was talking about, the oil import ban, like the first thing he says is gas prices are going to go up, but that's the sacrifice we're making for this to fight back.
Tim Dillon is crazy. I was listening to him this morning. He's like,
Yes, he is.
he's like going through the price of gasoline to get from Manhattan to the Hamptons, like calculating it. And he's like, look, guys, it's very simple. Do you care about Ukraine or do you just want your summer back? This is the choice that we have to make. Obviously not seriously. But I think like this idea of Americans sacrificing, we'll probably do it for a week or two. And then it's probably going to morph into let's go Brandon and
It'll turn into
off the sanctions.
Like even early coronavirus, like everyone seemed to agree that all right, we're gonna all go home, stay home, go back to the offices or whatever.
He had 5 days of that.
5 days. It was like, it was Easter, right? Wasn't it? It was like Trump says everything's going to be fine by Easter. That's like 2 months after sending people home.
So now you want a guy in the heartland with a pickup truck or a Suburban. You want this guy to give a shit about Ukraine more than 3 or 4 days with gas prices at $6. Right. It's going to be really tough to do. He doesn't know where Ukraine is on a map.
Right.
He's not glued to CNN. Like, he's just like, wait, what's going on?
Also, from a policy
Why
standpoint,
are we sacrificing?
What should we be doing? Tapping the reserves, or
what
can we do?
We are tapping the reserves, but it's like a drop in a.
So what can we do?
Drink some of this sujo.
Soju.
Soju.
Well, I mean, so I think that's actually a question that more people are going to start asking, right? They're all going to become, this is going to go on for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and everyone's going to decide that they're a geopolitical expert now. And so the person in the Suburban, that's got 20 miles a gallon on his SUV or whatever is going to say, why don't we just start firing missiles into the Kremlin or whatever? And
missiles instead of sanctions.
Well, so I
I
said this is maybe a watershed moment for cryptocurrency. We'll look back, maybe for green energy or some sort of energy independence.
Or the opposite, because I think it feels like it's not. I mean, the fact that Biden wasn't a big fan of fossil fuels has nothing to do with prices now, because those policies haven't had a chance to really take effect. But I think it's not a good look that he was making it harder for oil companies to do business, increase their cost of capital, fewer applications being accepted for fracking, shutting down the Keystone. Nothing to do with prices now, but it's not a good look right now. It makes us look like we're going to be more vulnerable. So instead of green, it could be like maybe it was a little premature to go in all on green, and we should increase our domestic.
Can we open that back up?
Let me get this straight. We can't drill. We can't have pipelines, but then also you're going to cut off the flow to the rest of the world via sanctions. So de facto, 95% of the cars on the road are going to struggle to be able to fill our tanks. That ain't going to work politically. Right. It didn't work in the 70s.
Electric vehicles are 2% of the cars.
Yeah, and I think even if we get over,
but that's more than zero, though. That's more than zero. Well, that's also part of the story, though, right? Like even
don't they use minerals for the batteries that are there too?
Right, the nickel and the palladium and all that stuff.
That didn't work though for Nixon. It didn't work for Ford.
Yeah, but fuel economy for cars is way up. It's only been going up, since then.
True.
And when I was in high school, I drove a '79 Impala station
79,
wagon.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a used car that got passed down to my parents. And I got 15 miles a gallon.
That thing was like the size of a living room.
It had 9 seatbelts in it.
I wanted to ask about China. So I don't know how closely you were following what went on today. The U.S., the SEC, the administration have been making noises about forcing Chinese companies that are going to trade on our exchanges to comply with our rules.
Good timing.
How dare they? Today, some shit went down.
Oh, Baba. Yikes.
These stocks had like a fast motion crash in the middle of the day. And
K-Web's down 10%.
What this is basically about is the SEC identified 5 U.S. listed ADRs.
Which ones?
Yum China. There's a biotech company called Beijing. Very clever. That sounds like what the Simpsons would call a Chinese biotech company, right?
Yeah.
Beijing, I like it. Ticker BGNE. For failing to comply with the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, which sounds made up, but I know it's real. And they would delist U.S. listed ADRs in 2024 for failing to allow the PCAOB, which is the accounting board, to access their audit reviews. It seems like this is not well timed. But whatever, they decided to go for it anyway. How much success are we going to have in driving these companies into Hong Kong listings and I guess losing the ability to invest in them for Americans? Will it matter? Will it matter to these companies? Will it matter to our investors? I don't know. What do you think?
I think I'm getting ahead of myself in saying that an economic war with China would be a lot more costly for us than
Yeah, why are we
economic war with Russia.
pulling on this thread right now? This is it's like the end of The Godfather, where they take out all the enemies of the family at once.
Yeah, maybe that's it. It's like, things are gonna be bad now. It's a kitchen sink quarter, as they say, in corporate America.
Allison, do you have a strong opinion about U.S. investors being victimized by Chinese blue chip tech companies?
I have a strong opinion about that, but I am concerned about general decoupling of financial markets and sort of trade in general. That I worry that, I'm now wondering if we sort of had this golden era of global trade and prosperity. And, I think anyway.
Wait, what do you mean had? What do you mean had? I don't like that.
Well, that's what I said. I'm sort of worried about this. And I think there is something to, anyway, everyone expected if we went into Chinese markets that see how great capitalism is and overthrow their authoritative government, and that didn't happen. I think there is something to more global integration fostering goodwill. And
yes, because it gives us all this shared thing to lose.
Yep.
If things get violent or we stop talking.
Like in some ways, I think I'm optimistic, although I could be completely wrong, that this is not going to lead to a Taiwan situation, because there's a lot more mutually assured destruction to these sorts of sanctions on China than there is from Russia. I mean, we're tied up in Russia, but not nearly as tied up as we are with China.
Well, so we had Dan Nathan on the show last week, and he's like, hypothetically, China pulls this shit with Taiwan right now. Mm-hmm. Is Disney pulling out of China? Not a chance. Mm-hmm. Are any of these companies pulling out of China? They'll say, no, it's different because blank. And I think we all kind of like
I'll become Taiwan experts that actually they have a historical claim.
Yeah. They'll become Taiwan experts, and they'll give China the cover for basically doing what it wants. And I think China probably knows that.
But yeah, one of the most sort of odd, uncomfortable things of the last couple of weeks was, hearing about the U.S. sending a delegation to the Winter Olympics, but then, reading in the papers that we don't have any government officials going because they're conducting genocide over there.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, this is the first time they're hearing about this or, getting attention to this. And it's like, well, wait a second. Why are we sending people over there? Why are we doing business with people over there? Why is this? Why are we tolerating this?
Yeah.
And then,
but we won't go to the Olympics.
We won't go to the Olympics. And, and then we're willing to, do this with
It's a serious question. And I really don't know the answer to this. Did the Olympics actually happen? Dead serious. Is there any evidence that an Olympics took place? Did anyone see any event televised anywhere?
I saw some scandal about a Russian skater.
Yeah, but did they skate? Or did they just have the scandal?
I think she fell.
Yeah, guys, I think it mattered. It mattered to the athletes, and they're all.
I feel like two institutions.
I'm just teasing. We love the Olympic athletes.
No longer matter, like the Oscars and the Olympics. Nobody cares.
I'm absolutely convinced there was no Olympics this year. There was just commercials for it.
I watched curling.
Of course you did.
Yeah, it was all curling.
And how did that go, Duncan?
It wasn't that exciting.
Well, give us all the details. We have so much time.
It's okay.
Why did you watch curling in particular? Because that's what, when you were flipping through the channels, that's what you stumbled on, or were you looking for it?
It was just on. I watched some snowboarding.
No, you have CNBC on, and then it goes to 5, and it cuts straight to curling.
Yeah.
Did the Chinese actually win a lot of medals in this? Was it worth it for them?
I think they did.
You think so, but no proof. I'm pretty sure none of this actually. I'm pretty sure none of this actually happened.
I don't really know.
You know that thing how there were movies that everybody thinks were movies, but they weren't.
Kazam.
Yeah, there's a movie poster for Shaquille O'Neal.
What is it? It's like the Mandela Effect, where everybody sort of agrees on the same thing, but it's actually false information.
But Kazam was not a movie?
That blew my mind too. Josh says it's not a movie.
No, it was called Kazam.
Not a movie. It did not happen. It was a fake poster with Shaq dressed as a genie, and his arms are folded, and it just looks like it should be a movie.
Right.
There never was that movie.
That's a great example, but you can't name another.
And then another example is the Monopoly Man.
Yes, I can.
The Monopoly Man. Everybody thinks the Monopoly Man wears a monocle. He does not.
Stop.
What? Come on.
Yeah, it's right up there.
He has a mustache and a top hat, but no monocle.
No monocle. Everyone thinks he has a monocle. He has no
what
monocle.
What the hell? How come we think he has a monocle?
Oh, here he does. In some pictures, he does, though.
Nah. Oh.
I feel like it's just when he reads. There is another example of that.
Oh, here it is. It says the Mandela Effect and how it affects you.
I'll give you another fake movie poster. Air Bud 2, Golden Receiver, and he has a football in his mouth. And people think that movie actually happened, but there was only ever one Air Bud.
Well,
Air Bud
everyone
could
knows that.
absolutely happen.
You knew that? No, it didn't. Did it?
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't a football movie.
I don't think it was. I think he still played basketball.
So why did they
I mean, come
make
on, you can
Kazam
play two
posters
sports?
if it was not a movie?
I think somebody just like made it as a goof, and everyone just thinks that actually happened, but it never really happened. And
I was always partial to Homeward Bound, personally.
Homeward Bound's great film. So listen, so the Chinese put out their own statement, and they were like, they put it out at midnight China time, which tells you that they actually care about this. And they were basically like, we are continuing to cooperate, and we hope we can resolve this amicably. So part of me feels like they don't care, and they'll just repatriate all their countries.
Haven't they been making it harder for Chinese companies to trade on U.S. stock markets
Yes.
on their as well?
They've been demanding them to come back at gunpoint. So maybe I don't know if they care or not. So our friend Brendan Ahern, who runs Crane Shares, put out a statement that they're going to switch out of US ADRs into Hong Kong share class. The ETF, which is gigantic for a Chinese tech ETF, will remain the same. They'll just buy the stocks on a different exchange. So there is a workaround if you want to still invest in these things.
I think the long-term cultural effects of what's going on right now is kind of weird.
It's not great.
It's not great because, like, because a lot of the exchanges of information, cultural stuff starts with, these sort of economic trade business interests, right?
Right.
Like, someone's dad goes to China to do some business. They come back and it's like, I'm going to tell you all about all these cool things, I learned in China, and, all those kids,
I
get
brought you
culture.
souvenirs. Yeah, I'm
Right.
with you on that.
Are we going to have less of that?
We have a chart of Alibaba, Crane Shares, JD. John, throw that up. Like, this is this a year? 9 months? This is like substantial.
It's even worse if you bring it back to like February. Crane Shares is 70% off the highs, I think.
I mean, if you're a U.S. investor and these companies leave the New York Stock Exchange, you don't care. You're like, please put me out of my misery.
I mean, this chart kind of looks like a lot of like high growth tech stocks too from the last year.
Right, U.S. or China, it almost wouldn't even matter.
Oh my God, Baba is Baba below the IPO price?
That stock is.
Hold on, let me see.
That's one of the biggest crashes I think I've ever seen.
It went
in
from
a stock that
320
size.
to 90. No, it's not below the IPO price, but it's close.
You don't hear from Jack Ma a whole lot anymore.
He's not in charge of it anymore.
Right.
They told him to take 5. So back to inflation. What do we want to do with this commodity spot index?
Oh, throw up these charts, Big John.
What is
That was the
Price
biggest
change of one
the
week
biggest,
price change.
The biggest weekly change ever. And again, this has not yet shown up in the official CPI data. We'll see that next month. Do we have more charts here?
Today they did February CPI, and it's another record, 7.9%. Is that the number?
Yeah.
No, I think we got January. Did we get February?
We got February
We got
today,
February.
It's
and
February.
and it broke another record.
Right. All the way back to January 1982.
I still have this stupid opinion that the cure for high prices is high prices. Am I going to be wrong?
Yeah.
This time I will be.
Well, I mean, I think I was reading Jason Furman on Twitter saying we've reached the point where it's getting baked into wages.
Yeah.
And once that happens,
Then that's it. The genie's out of the bottle.
genie's out of the bottle. And, I think anyway, the Fed is going to do some rate hikes. I doubt they're going to be as aggressive as they were going to be before.
I think, the wage thing I think is a big deal because I was actually talking to my parents.
Can you explain what that means, though? So, like, we now are paying people, and implicit in that dollar amount is what we think it costs them to get to and from work.
Yeah.
And
So
put food on their table.
So now it's the wage price spiral. So people demand higher wages to compensate for inflation, so they have more money, so they spend more. So prices go up again, and then they ask for even higher wages. And
So,
Well,
so
look
it's like
at-
a feedback loop.
Yeah.
It's paying for that demand.
Speaking of
we
Jason
would-
Furman, I saw him tweet this today. This is disgusting. We're looking at a chart of real average hourly earnings. And he said average hourly earnings have been declining for more than a year as inflation has outpaced nominal wage gains. This is larger than any 12-month pre-pandemic decline since 1980. So nominal wages have been going up. Cool, especially in the lower end. Like they were getting the biggest gains. But look at this. Inflation took all of that away and then some.
at the low end, things that are most affected by inflation take up a bigger share of your budget. So
when I was born in Queens, 39 and a half years ago.
Are you Peter Parker?
I'm Peter Parker. Yeah, I'm one of the multiverse Peter Parkers, and I never really quite understood the story of how this happened, but my parents picked up the family and we all moved to Kentucky. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks.
As one does.
Yeah, as one does. But it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago, I'm talking to my mom and she's like telling me how beef prices are going up and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, we have this historic inflation, whatever. And she said, yeah, that's why we moved to Kentucky. Like there was inflation, but your dad's employer couldn't give him a raise. And so
you need a lower cost of living.
We need a lower cost of living. So, what's the alternative is staying here and starving, or we're going to go to a place where everything's a lot cheaper.
So what part of Kentucky did you end up in?
Louisville.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But the problem is there's no problem with Louisville. The problem is now you can't, where are you going to go? It's food, right? Food is food.
Yeah, I mean, there's less dispersion of prices than there was in the 80s.
Yes, but rents, there's still a huge dispersion between, for example, Queens and Louisville.
That's true. In New York rates in particular.
Right. Almost anywhere other than here, save for Miami, would be better from a cost of living perspective, which is why I'm so smart. I'm hiring so many people in New York. So, some part of me should maybe listen to my own commentary.
How much is a burrito bowl these days?
Forget about it, sister. Sam, you wrote about the other side of the surging oil price story. Yep. Can you get into this a little bit and explain what you're telling people?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, no one's disagreeing with the fact that rising costs of energy and the rising costs of anything that you don't want to pay for, that's gonna pinch, and that means less discretionary, whatever, less money for fun, but. If we're thinking from a higher, stock market wide or a macro economy standpoint, you have to go back to, these bigger trends of energy intensity in the economy has been on the decline for decades. Fuel economy for cars have been improving for decades.
Thank God, though, because if that were not the case, this would be so much worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the average company use less oil than it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
I think the message from these sort of energy intensity charts, I don't think I have it up, or maybe if you scroll down a little bit further, but it's just you hit the paywall. I should give you guys.
We hit the reg wall. I think I'm registered, but I don't think they are.
It's a really simple chart. It's like an OECD economies. It's like the global developing markets, emerging markets, and since the 70s, the 1,000 barrels per dollar of GDP or whatever, I don't know what the metric is, just has been on decline for decades. So yeah, we're just less exposed to this. Everything's more efficient.
Slightly mitigating factor, but the sticker shock doesn't go away.
No.
Whether or not we're more energy efficient, people don't like to see that number.
But are we using more energy overall because we're making more stuff, even if we're making it more efficiently?
Yeah, I think so. But on a per capita basis, I think the situation has improved for individuals.
John, let's go to this PCE shares chart, energy, goods, and services. What is this saying?
So this is from one of Neil Dutta's note from Renaissance Macro, and this is energy, goods, and services spending as a percentage of personal consumption expenditures.
So that decline starts in, let's say, 1980.
Yeah, it goes from almost 10% down to about 4%. It's not the numbers aren't mind blowing, but it's in line with these trends of energy is becoming less a part of what we're spending money on.
How much of this is because prices went down, and how much of it is because of efficiency?
I think it's probably a bit of both because you see in the early 80s, and then you also see in 2008 when we had that big oil price spike that the price move certainly has an impact there. So yeah, it's probably going to jump up when we get
we can already see it.
Data. Oh yeah.
It hasn't affected earnings. Put this next chart up, John. Earnings keep rising, whatever inflation does. Rising earnings per share has been a constant through different inflation regimes. This time might be different, just given the speed of the spike.
You know why earnings are going to get hit? Because
they have to, right?
Consumers are going to get hit. And so,
right.
Ipso facto.
The magnitude is too great for us not to see. I'm not saying a recession, but
another thing too, though, the U.S. has become a net exporter, or as of 2020 or as of 2021, the U.S. has become a net exporter of petroleum and refined petroleum products.
Yes, which
So-
doesn't help with the price, though.
It doesn't help with the price, but a lot of this money is going back to U.S. companies.
That's interesting. It's just moving from California to Texas,
Right.
or New York to Oklahoma. It's not necessarily money going out the door to different consumers in another world.
Right, and this is why the energy ETFs, the U.S. energy ETFs are up 20-30%.
So if you could bet on it, if you could bet on a city's economy right now, you would want to be long Houston. Short Honolulu,
right,
that kind of thing.
You know what's nice to see? I know it's short term, but whatever. When we announced that we were going to stop importing oil, that day, crude spiked to 130. It's now down to 106. So it's pulled back quite a bit.
Some of that is market mechanics.
Small victory. Totally.
Just a lot of people getting way too bullish at the same time. And I don't know. Most of these commodity spikes don't last for long.
Oil is just a really weird one to figure out too. I mean, we had negative prices
Crazy.
2 years ago, but I mean, this is also a thing where it's not an asset class where that's necessarily buy the rumor, sell the news kind of a thing.
What do we think about Carl Icahn selling Oxy to Warren Buffett?
Is that who sold it? No, I know he sold his stake, but does the timing match up?
Buffett.
I think the timing is about the same.
Yeah.
Like they had filings at about the same time.
Yeah.
The irony is that Icahn's stake in Oxy was an activist stake saying that they should not have bought Anadarko. Right. He was trying to stop the merger.
Well, he did well.
The value of the company now is predicated on the fact that they bought Anadarko.
Right.
Like the reason Buffett wants to invest is because it's the biggest natural
By the way,
gas.
I watched the Icahn doc. We were talking about that at dinner last week.
Yeah, did you like it?
I loved it.
Did you watch
great.
it?
Yeah, it was good. I was actually going to bring it up for my what I'm consuming.
Let's just do it right now, just real quick. I feel like this is weird to say because he's obviously like a shark, but there is like a sweetness about him.
Yeah.
Well, there's also something kind of like just direct. Like he just goes into companies and just speaks the truth, which most people won't do.
The shareholders the TWA employees going to his door, and
Yeah.
he's like, "Are you gonna let me talk?
Right.
Are you gonna let me talk?" He brings his kids
With his
out.
accent
He brings the
and-
kids
yeah.
outside.
I thought what was interesting about it, I kind of knew this history, but most people didn't. He didn't start off as, I know everything.
Right.
He was like an options broker. He was just very good at
Making
figuring
money.
out how to make money.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like if he ended up in Hollywood or as a military contractor.
He's
or,
100 out of 100 chances at life he'll become rich every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I feel like if you just reset everything within like 5 years, he'd be.
He could have ran
right
Hollywood. He
back.
could have ran Hollywood.
Right. So what is that? Is that
And apparently he
Queens?
could have been a philosopher too.
Is that like the Queens in him, or was he from the Bronx?
No, I think he's from Queens.
Yeah. Well, the
Queens.
story with his father,
By the way,
like
I was also born in Queens.
No, we know.
Just to
We know.
reflect back on what we just
when he cried thinking about his dad, like not loving him and stuff like that was
Yeah.
and he has a sweet relationship with his kids too.
Yeah.
He called his
Yeah.
dad a communist.
Yes, that was crazy.
I do that. So the other cool thing was his relationship with his wife. She looks way younger than him, and she is.
They bust balls. That was great.
But I think like most people would look at that and be like, "Oh, she's there for the money." No, actually, she worked with him, and they spent a ton of time together, and they've been together
for
forever.
a long time. Yeah.
She wasn't like an '80s trophy that he forgot to.
I
replace.
googled
Like,
that. I googled that while I was watching.
I thought that was cool that they
They've
had
been
that
together since like the
relationship.
'90s, I think.
And his son is like actually driving major investment
Netflix.
decisions.
Remember that Netflix
Yeah.
investment was his son.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I thought that was a
I remember
Carl thing.
that.
Who's
Apple
responsible
too.
for Blockbuster?
Right,
Apple too.
also.
He sunk that.
Oh, okay.
Icahn sunk that. He that up.
He crushed it.
Yeah. They could have been Netflix, and he really messed that one up.
Well, anyway, back to Occidental Petroleum. What Buffett sees in the company is what Icahn fought the company to not do. And I think that's why Icahn gets the reputation that he's a vulture or a raider or whatever, because very often when he runs into a situation, it's to stop a company from making a big investment and have that capital come back in the form of a dividend or a
So
buyback.
now Berkshire is going to push Oxy to get into the metaverse.
Yeah, it's very likely. Allison, you're talking that risk a lot this past 2 weeks. I read it's called The Known Unknowns. It's your Substack letter.
I'm a weekly reader as well.
Thank
Michael
you.
is a weekly reader. You're worried that young people are too compliant and that people are not willing to take enough risk or rebel enough in order for our country to continue to innovate. And one of the examples you cited, I was giggling to myself, was you walk around on the streets and you see people in their 20s wearing masks, and you're like, what the f is wrong with these people? I'm so with you on that, like 100%.
There's a negative correlation between age and outdoor mask wearing in my neighborhood.
That's
Why are
weird.
we
That's
wearing
weird.
masks outdoor? They don't even work indoors. And if we're in our 20s, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing at this point?
People who are 80 are maskless on the street, but people who are, I live near NYU. All the NYU students are all wearing masks all the time.
They are.
It could be that they're all immunocompromised.
It's probably not that though. It's probably exactly what you're saying,
Right.
which is that. I mean, why aren't these kids like bigger badasses?
Well, especially even during like when things were bad at the pandemic, they were always at the lowest risk. Yet seemed to be going along with everything. Like
What's the problem? First, what's the problem with this?
well, I mean, it's
We know they're not having any sex.
yeah, we know that.
That we
They're not
know.
individuating from their parents. Like they go to college and still talk to their parents 8 times a day.
Yeah,
And
we know that too.
And individuation from your parents is important. It's part of your psychological growth.
The boomers turned 18 and fled.
Yeah.
Like for all their faults. I'm not a boomer, so I'm not like I'm not doing an encomium to boomerhood, but they left.
They were rebellious.
They were
Woodstock.
rebellious. They grew up. They left. They did whatever they wanted.
Yeah, they had protests where they got arrested and protested unpopular things. Like they were rebels.
And you probably become really good parents too. Like if you have like a long track record of making mistakes and getting out of that.
Yes.
And stuff.
Well, aren't they parents to them now?
Well, I don't know.
All right, so we have a generation of rule followers. So we're probably not going to produce the next Steve Jobs out of this crop,
Exactly. So,
or the next Mark Zuckerberg either. So maybe it's good.
yeah, well, that's true. But yeah, I mean, to be an innovator, you have to be a rule breaker.
Yeah.
I was reading this book by Joel
Guilty.
who wrote about the culture of growth. And what you need is people who push back on the prevailing wisdom, question the rules, question authority. And that really is what he thinks is behind prosperity. So if you have a bunch of people who are like, yeah, I'll follow all the rules, and in fact get kind of angry at older people not following the rules.
There was a great.
That's a good take.
There's a great viral TikTok that was going around that splices Kanye West talking and Steve Jobs talking. They're basically talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And Kanye starts by saying, you know, when you're a kid, if you stand on a table, your parents are going to yell at you and they tell you to get off that table. And that's a rule that they set in front of you. And as you grow older, people are just constantly putting these tables around you that you can't stand on. And before you know it, you don't know why, you're not standing on those tables. And he's like saying that, like, if you really put your mind to it, like, maybe you should stand on that table and take that risk.
Is that a
as you're
dare?
saying.
Where's the table?
You know
right
who's
here?
Yeah, we're going to do it right after this after a couple more
You know who's a
shots.
great millennial? Mohammed bin Salman. This guy knows how to shake shit up. So he like gets a little bit of power and he locks up everybody in a hotel. And he's basically like, everybody here is going to give up all of their money back to me
Duncan's shaking his head.
and pledge loyalty to me. And like, that's a guy that was not afraid of breaking some rules and some taboos. I feel like there's.
Is that taboo in Saudi Arabia, though?
I guess not. Like what? Locking people? No, it's never been done before.
Yeah,
Never
well,
had a royal lock up the
Well, if
other
you-
royals
if you-
and demand loyalty.
if he wants to be rebellious, let women drive.
Now we're going crazy. Do you have any idea what could happen if women start driving like all over the place without any supervision?
I-
Is going to be
Haven't-
flying cars in the UAE and.
Well, so what happens with this whole generation of rule followers now? Are they like terrified of their own shadow? Do they just not take the risks that are necessary for us to have creative destruction and capitalism? Or maybe are we worried too much about this and they'll come out of their shell?
I mean, I worry about it some, but sometimes I think maybe even it's good because you'll always get that minority who are rule followers, who aren't rule followers. And in fact, they have so much to rebel against I hate railing against Gen Z and millennials because the ones I actually speak to are actually delightful and thoughtful and hate all
Wait,
their.
what do you think you are? Are you an Xer?
I think I'm born the same year as you.
You and me are the same, but
So
what are we?
We are not in a generation.
No, because
No.
we're too late.
We're
for
not Gen
the
Xers.
Xers won't claim us.
No, we were because remember the whole slacker thing? Like that was
That
not
wasn't us.
We were too young. We were like in junior
But
high.
the millennials won't have us either, Allison.
We're-
They will not
we're-
claim.
We're
right?
generation.
Oh, you're a boomer.
Yeah, so
We're
the
generation
millennials
less.
were a bloomer.
So
we're boomers.
we're free to comment with no stake in any game.
I kind of like that outsider
You
status.
have no home. You have no
Yeah.
home.
I think if there's evidence of some hope here is all these reports of small business applications spiking and everybody going out and doing their own thing.
Yeah, but aren't there a lot of old people who are retirees who are starting their own
That's a
business?
great question is who are these people?
But it's also a lot of young people. So many people
think
are
it's
leaving.
both.
I mean, millennials are getting a lot older now, so I think a lot of these people
And they're
are
changing
taking
jobs
risks.
more because we had this downward trend in job changing.
Right.
Can we address this part? This is you.
Listen, hold on. 30% of millennials are bald, so millennials are not kids anymore.
All right.
No, they are not.
I think we're talking about the older Gen Zs is what we're talking about. We're talking about the kids coming out of school now. Allison, this is you, and this resonated with me. This is concerning not only for their well-being, but also because you need to be defiant to be a great innovator. Coming up with good ideas requires rejecting the prevailing wisdom and questioning your elders. You can't be a rule follower, let alone an obsessive rule enforcer and moral scold, as many young people seem to be lately. So you probably wrote that just for popularity on Twitter. But I do see like people filming their elders and then like uploading it to shame them.
Yeah.
And they are scolds. And everything you say is problematic. And Friends is problematic. And like things that you would normally look at and be like, all right, what could possibly be harmful about this? I'll tell you what. That kind of like pervasive force within culture maybe is more pronounced online than it is in real life, but it's a thing.
It's messed up. I mean, I think you worry more about being shamed and scolded by young people than old people, and it should be the other way around.
Right. Young people don't seem to have any patience or tolerance for somebody who thinks differently than they do right now. But maybe it won't stay like that forever.
Well, also, as I say, the actual Gen Zers I know when I teach or when I interact with older people's kids actually are great. And if they complain to me about anything, it's the fact that all their peers are annoying. So there is a critical mass of people who are rebels. They just aren't being. Maybe they'll come into their own and fight back against the annoying people in their own generation.
And a lot of these kids too, probably graduated college into a booming economy, and so it probably they don't have to worry about stuff like work and paychecks and paying the bills and stuff. So this is the only thing that they can worry about is, criticizing society.
Right.
Although it is crazy that the whole pandemic happened, it was not really a huge risk to young people, yet they were like so enthusiastic about all these huge restrictions on their lives. I'll still never get over that.
You know what's great about Gen Z? They don't tweet.
Yeah, are they just on
Tweeting
TikTok?
millennial and Xer bullshit.
Yeah.
Gen Z will go on TikTok and shame you with a duet.
Yeah.
So they'll take a video of you saying something, and they will go
They're
side by side and roll their eyes.
They're going to upload this and say,
I hope so.
And then they're going to start marching out in front of the building.
Can you imagine? I can't imagine. All right, tucking this in here. Biden came out in favor of acknowledging the existence of crypto. Mike, was there anything in that?
Talk about okay, boomer. I read this for 3 minutes. I was like, I can't.
There's nothing in there.
It's word salad. There's nothing.
Anything worth mentioning from that, or not really?
Maybe what was excluded from it. Like it wasn't like we're going to shut this down, or this is like.
Oh no, he's like we're going to figure out how to regulate it.
Yeah, so that's got to be like the fact that it's not terrible news to the crypto community is about as good as.
Yeah, I was to say, Bitcoin price rallied because it's basically a stock at this point. There seemed to be a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about regulators and banking authorities racing in here to police all this stuff. I thought this was supposed to be the opposite of that, but apparently this is now just another Wall Street plaything, and everybody wants more regulations so they can get their ETF. Is that a reasonable read on Bitcoin's price rallying on increased regulation?
Maybe
Am I being too sardonic?
Oh, maybe it's like a real asset now.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, right? It's like, you hit critical mass with like the high risk takers who are willing to put money into this in an unregulated market. But now everyone's looking for, well, who's going to be the next buyer? And, once you put some regulation into that, then it's like, okay, you open the doors to institutions and it's like, okay, here's another $1 trillion that we can pour into crypto.
It's cool that JP Morgan is going to come in and be part of all this decentralization, I guess.
There was a chart in Barron's over last weekend showing the breakdown on who's trading crypto, like the volume, and institutional investors are now a bigger and bigger player, which might explain why it tends to act, at least in the short term, very much in line with the NASDAQ, like on big news releases.
It's the same pool of capital.
Yeah.
Really? How much of it is institutional money?
There was a chart in Barron's, and it showed the breakdown between institutional and retail, and the institutional volume is growing, and it's basically dominating at this point.
Huh.
Well, institutional dollars will eventually dominate all these markets the longer they stay around because it's just bigger money. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised. Who put this in the doc? Downside risk. Morgan Stanley strategists see equity storm forming.
Here we go. Allison, look at this chart. So institutional is the blue line. Retail is the top. Is black. It's tiny. It's basically all institutional dollars now.
So this is all pension money? Great.
I guess hedge funds on
It's
behalf
Citadel.
of Kentucky teachers, which by the
Yep.
way, you saw that. Oh my
Oh
God.
yeah.
What a shit show.
What Kentucky teachers are in?
The Kentucky teachers pension system
I
is the
think-
second biggest holder of
Right.
Scotiabank.
It's like a small.
Russia.
I think it was a small percentage of the pension fund itself.
But still.
But yeah.
All right.
All right, what's this? All
Global
right.
earnings revisions
More-
turn negative for the first time since September 2020. This is notable.
I think we get a global recession. I'm obviously not rooting for it, but Michael Wilson from Morgan Stanley wrote, "We are firmly in the grasp of a bear market that is incomplete in both time and price. Earnings delivery is paramount at a time when liquidity is being sucked out by central banks across the world. Removing this support could leave some indices floating on air." And they say any relief should be sold. So
they're not by the dip anymore.
So there's gonna be a furious rally, right? With God willing, we'll get some sort of resolution or even talks of one, and everyone's sold, everyone's bared up. So we'll get, we will get a nice bounce at some point. But the problem is, then what?
Sam, you have some pushback on this.
Yeah, I really like. I mean, I follow all the strategists pretty closely. They send me all their research and stuff. And this one, I kind of had two issues with. The first one was when you look at this chart, it's like, yes, this is accurate. This is what the data says. But I don't know if you guys got the other chart that I sent. It was below that.
We do. Change in S&P 500 quarterly earnings per share.
Yeah.
First 2 months of the quarter.
First 2 months of the quarter. So it's basically the same message, but it zooms out, and instead of going to 2020, it goes out to 2017. And so this is something that was flagged by Nick Colas at DataTrek. And basically the message here is early on in
This is
a
amazing.
quarter,
Do you see what this is saying?
they're always cutting estimates. Analysts are always cutting estimates
In the first 2 months.
Yeah, going into earnings season.
Why?
And it's always the current quarter. I don't know what it is. I think it's like earnings management, and it lowers the bar for earnings beats and stuff. Because in every single one of these quarters, by the way, more than 50% of companies are beating expectations.
This seems to have shifted though in 2020
So what
and 21.
So what Nick was saying was, with early 2020 and 2021, this is like very sort of in line with what happens in early recoveries. The analysts underestimate how big or how aggressive the recovery is coming out from the bottom. But after, a couple of quarters, you get back to this thing where, all right, it's, the quarter just ended, earnings season is about to start. People are always nervous, and you start cutting estimates going into the earnings announcement.
So
and then they report, and then they beat expectations by whatever percentage.
So maybe the market's getting ahead of this. In fact, the market is already sussing out some sort of economic slowdown, right?
I mean, you also had, the whole, we can go into the valuation question for forever, but valuations were stretched, and it was giving people sort of a reason to sell. I don't know if, I'm not really convinced that we're on the cusp of a recession, because there's still so much pent up demand. I mean, this was a big theme in the Q4 earnings season. It was a big theme in Q3 too, where companies were all like, anything in terms of like caution regarding, sales in the current quarter or the next quarter had to do with the fact that they couldn't keep up with demand. They didn't have enough workers to sell product. They didn't have enough workers to manufacture product. They couldn't put together, their products because,
in other words, none of it was a demand problem.
It was not a demand problem. It was all a supply
I guess
problem.
you could say, but we've never seen inflation run at these levels without a subsequent recession, especially when rates are normalizing. But so
It's also often the Fed that causes the recession.
That's not going to be the case this time. Or maybe it is the Fed's inaction that's causing the recession.
Well, here's the thing. The Fed's just in a bad spot, because it's sort of like after a while, inflation does so much damage,
There's nothing they can do.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, before you get to the recession, though, like you have to do something so bad that, all the employers decide to take off all of their 10 million open job listings, right?
Yeah.
So we're not going from a place where, where the economy has matured. All the signals are saying that the economy still wants to grow. It's just that there's not enough stuff and not enough supply. So what happens is, as these prices go up and, the cure for higher prices, you're going to lose some of that incremental demand. But, it's like, the U.S. economy is basically like a hot restaurant, right? It's like it's fully booked, but there's also a line waiting outside, right? Someone cancels their reservation because, they can't make it. They're going to still fill those tables because there's still someone waiting in line.
Unless the sticker shock of what it costs to hire the next 10 employees actually does make employers start to pull those open jobs off the table and just say, as much as we would like to add people right now at prevailing labor costs, we literally can't do it. And everybody having that idea at the same time actually is possible given the current dynamics in the labor market.
Well, gas prices are so high, no one can drive to the restaurant.
Right. And well, speaking of gas prices, that's actually what's going on with, the energy producers, right? Like, sure, they can make a ton of money selling even more.
But they need to use energy themselves.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, they have to use energy themselves, but they also went through that cycle, right, where, they see the fluctuation and then the prices come down a little bit, but they were just drilling they had too many operators out there, and half of these companies go bankrupt.
It's also possible to have a mild recession, right? Like a recession doesn't have to be catastrophic world ending.
We used to have a lot of mild recessions. Remember the Great Moderation?
Yeah. Well,
Those were good times.
it's harder to have a mild recession now because we've centered the whole economy around the stock market, and stocks don't do anything mildly.
Well, and that's why the Fed, even if you look at the Fed's plans, they want to go to neutral. Like you can't go to neutral
What's
to fight
neutral?
inflation.
7% right now?
No, neutral is like
I'm kidding.
2%. But that doesn't fight inflation. That just doesn't juice inflation.
Right.
But they're not even planning on doing much about inflation.
Well, I think they think it'll go away eventually.
Yeah, that seems to be our solution for everything.
All right. Hard pivot. This week we're gonna do Josh's gossip corner.
What does that mean?
Barry Diller is being investigated for insider trading. And when I read this, I said, nobody could be this fucking stupid. I can't listen, I could be wrong, but let me just read this to you guys. And not to get personal, but would anybody really do this? U.S. probes trade by Barry Diller and David Geffen before a big merger. So basically, these guys were buying call options on Activision days before Microsoft bought the company. Additionally, they're friends with the old CEO of Activision. I mean, it looks so ridiculously bad. Is it possible it's just a coincidence? I mean, I don't want you to accuse anybody of insider trading, but what was your take when you read this? It seems insane to me that rich people would even think about doing something like this on purpose.
Yeah, so when I saw this, and listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but when I saw this, I'm thinking it's got to be either one extreme or the other extreme, right? One, this is complete not true. They get clean. It was, coincidence, paperwork mix up or whatever. Or, again, let me preface this. This is me putting a conspiracy theory hat.
Yeah.
Maybe this is so prevalent among the billionaire community that everyone's just constantly trading on, insider information and options and stuff.
Right.
And then this is one out of 1,000 billionaires who, didn't file their paperwork correctly and it got out. And then this becomes
Or they just made so much money because this was it was $40 and it went to 93.
I mean, this was a big controversy to the point.
So it's Diller, it's his his von Furstenberg. I think this is son-in-law.
I think so.
Okay. And Geffen. These are some of the richest people in the history of the world.
Do you think they'll go to prison?
No. Bought options to purchase
Martha Stewart.
Activision shares at $40 each on January 14th. This is a good part. In privately arranged transactions through JP Morgan Chase. So they don't buy the filthy options that me and Batnick buy.
Filthy options.
They have bespoke, custom-made contracts.
Martha Stewart had inside information on oil.
So they bought these, and Activision was trading at 63. So they bought in the money options, which maybe makes it less bad. It looked like less of a gamble. Did anybody in the world not think that Activision was for sale? I feel like that was very commonly known. So a lot of these mitigating factors don't make it look as bad unless they have text between these guys that are yeah, trust me, pull the trigger. Now's the time, which they probably don't have. So
what's really interesting about Activision is there was a lot of people were accusing Buffett and Berkshire of front running this thing.
Yep.
And Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, something that they never do is they talk to the press or address things. They never put press releases out. Their earnings announcements come on Saturdays. The one extremely unusual, maybe first non-quarterly earnings press release that Buffett issues is addressing these accusations.
I don't think people like being accused of crimes.
I think.
I don't blame them because that looked crazy too. But look, companies get acquired, and somebody has to own it. and oftentimes it'll be rich people that own it, and hopefully that's as simple as it is here.
Yeah, and people commit crimes, so maybe it did happen.
I don't believe anybody's this stupid.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy that maybe it did happen.
I think that's their defense. They're like,
Yeah.
we're gonna
Are
do
you
this.
kidding me?
Do you think I'm that stupid? Would be no, but that's if I were Diller, that's what I would have my lawyer argue.
Yeah.
You can't possibly think that I would risk everything I've built over 70 years on an options bet in an insider trade. What? Yeah. You can't. Your honor. You can't. Amazon 20-for-1 split today, and last night, and $10 billion buyback, which is tiny. It's a multi-trillion-dollar company. This is like a long time coming. I'm evolving my thinking on buybacks.
I think all the gains held. What's your thinking?
I used to like have this very high-minded Warren Buffett-esque take on buybacks, where I was like, it doesn't change the fundamentals, and only an idiot would buy a stock because they announce a split. It's just like getting 16 slices out of a pizza pie versus, you know what? That's not true. Like Tesla did a split, stock still hasn't come down to earth. Apple,
Same with Apple.
Yep.
I feel like that's a
Nvidia
move.
did a 4-for-1.
That's a move.
It's up 50%.
If your
since then.
stock's going down, just split it. That'll kickstart. That'll get the bulls involved.
No, but people like different sizes of things that they buy. That's why there's a price club and a convenience store and everything in between. And give the people what they want. And when you do, you get rewarded.
Yep.
So
And there's a higher margin on the the smaller pieces.
So it's not that they know that their stock price is going to go up anyway, and they're taking advantage.
no, I don't think it's that simple.
It's probably a pretty good sign that they're confident the stock's not going to crash anytime soon.
What's this
How
B of A?
embarrassing.
What's this B of A research that you have?
So this was from B of A's Jared Woodard, and he wrote this after the Google 20-for-1 split. And basically, so he had some research showing that, on average, these companies tended to outperform
Companies that are splitting.
that are splitting. But I think what he was trying to say is, or I think what he's saying is that, it's not because of the split itself that, these stocks rally.
Right.
It's because the companies that tend to announce splits are
good companies.
yeah, they have earnings momentum and all that stuff. So
You know why that's not the case this time? It was the case after he wrote this about Google. Google had just rallied furiously, and it was a bull market for tech. Same with Tesla's split. Same with Nvidia's split. Same with Apple's split. Amazon has been flat for 2 years. Stock is going nowhere. So it is a slightly different case than the other tech giants in recent history that announced splits. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be investing in Amazon, but I just think it's something that's different. Do you have anything to say on splits? Bullish?
Bullish. Memes are bullish.